for America, prejudices had ceased to exist. As the first important act of his second term, Woodrow Wilson signed an executive order which armed all U.S. merchant ships with naval guns. It was another compromise, called by Woodrow Wilson armed neutrality.
Congressman Lawton, good evening. This is the Western Union. I have a telegram for you from Washington, signed Carter, Sergeant at Arms. The message reads, 3 more American ships having been torpedoed. The President has advanced the date of the special session of Congress to April 2nd. That's signed Carter, Sergeant at Arms.
Armed neutrality had failed. The American people looked to the White House. For 3 years, Woodrow Wilson had compromised with Germany, and each new compromise had brought new indignity. Now his people wanted war. On the evening of April 2nd, 1917, the entire nation awaited Woodrow Wilson's fateful answer. The answer came, calling upon the nation to mobilize its resources and its manpower. Woodrow Wilson declared that America had no quarrel with the German people, sought no dominion and no conquest. But the imperial German government had subjected the rights and the ideals of the United States to such violation as no nation of free men could endure.
It's a great speech so far.
Here's the end of it now. For democracy, for the right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own governments, for the rights and liberties of small nations, for a universal dominion of right by such a concert of free peoples as shall bring peace and safety to all nations and make the world itself at last free. To such a task we can dedicate our lives and our fortunes with the pride of those who know that the day has come when America is privileged to spend her blood for the principles which gave her birth and happiness and the peace which she has treasured. God helping her, she can do no other. Okay, George. 3-column box on the front page. Run it over. Edit, the President's war message. With the main head, Wilson calls for war.
Date of birth?
February 10th, 1899.
Place of birth?
Miles City, Montana.
Boys, I'm not going to make a speech here today. You're leaving home to begin the long trek to France. No words of mine can tell you what you're going to fight for. You all know. The only thing I can say is we're all proud of you. Goodbye, and good luck.
Right. Hey! Come on! Ho!
With serious purpose, the nation dug in for the biggest job it had ever tackled. Starting with a regular army of 130,000 and 70,000 half-trained, ill-equipped reserves, the United States undertook a mobilization of manpower and resources without precedent in any age or any time. To equip America's soldiers was U.S. industry's first job. Production began on 14 million uniforms, 27 million pairs of shoes, 3.5 million rifles and bayonets, 250,000 machine guns, in the nation's war effort, every citizen was to take a part.
Ed, how about putting me to work as one of your 4-minute men? You young fellows have more than you can handle, and I'd like to help in this war, too.
Well, Dr. Hatfield, it's pretty strenuous. 4 or 5 speeches a day.
That doesn't worry me a bit. I've been preaching sermons since you were a boy in knee pants.
All right. When can you start?
Start now.
Through Liberty loans, the American people raised the huge sum of $24 billion. Within 3 months after the declaration of war came the draft, the first military conscription since the war between the states. 24 million men of military age registered for war service and waited for their numbers to come up. In the 19 months of war, there were to be 3 drawings of the draft lottery.
That you, stranger?
Yup. I had a hunch my number was due up. Look, here's another one.
By the spring of 1918, A nation that for half a century had not fought a major war had called nearly 3 million of its citizens to the colors. Another 3 million men were at work in U.S. war industries. The biggest job was steel, and more steel. Steel for the big shell, more steel for the big guns. With its experience in supplying French and British armies, American industry in the first year produced 1 million tons of munitions. Meanwhile, in France, French and British manpower continued to hold off the powerful German war machine. For their new ally 3,000 miles away was unprepared and could not send the trained men so desperately needed to stop the great German drive of late 1917. It was not until early 1918 that America's first million were equipped and in training. Still ahead were weeks of body-hardening marches, long, precious weeks of training for trench warfare, for going over the top. Crews for convoys and submarine patrols, crews for transports. Transferred to the Army were the Navy's regiments of U.S. Marines, soldier sailors who were to take their places on the battlefields of France.
Private Benzinger, report to commanding officer immediately. Hogan, up the front. Inspection. Halt. What? Halt. Private Benzinger, sir.
Yes, at ease. You know, I suppose, that your father has been interned as an enemy alien.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, but I have to tell you that it will not be possible for you to go overseas with the regiment under the circumstances.
Yes, sir.
That's all, I'm afraid.
Aye, aye, sir.
Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Paul. Goodbye, you with your old hee-haw. I may not know what the war's about, but when flying brush I'll soon find out. And oh, my sweetheart, don't you fear, I'll lend you a king for a souvenir. I'll get you a Turk and a Kaiser too, and that's about all one fella can do.
Fellas getting everything you want?
Well, almost.
That's fine. Nothing too good for our boys.
Can I have a package of sweet caps, please?
Why, certainly, Eddie.
Did you know my outfit was leaving tonight, Mrs. Averill?
I suppose you're awfully glad.
You bet.
Well, hello there.
Hello, dear.
Evening, Ruth.
I'll be with you in just a minute.
Mr. Lawton,
Yes, my boy.
could you do me a special favor?
Doing favors is a congressman's main job.
Well, do you suppose you could have me ordered over to France in a hurry? I'm afraid if I don't get over there pretty soon, there won't be any war left to fight.
I wouldn't worry too much about that, my boy.
Good night, Mrs. Averill.
Goodbye, Eddie. Good luck.
Thank you.
Under the command of Admiral William Sims, since the declaration of war, U.S. destroyers had been helping to rid the seas of the German U-boat with the aid of a new British weapon, the depth bomb. For a year, U.S. dreadnoughts had been with the British fleet at Scapa Flow. Now the efforts of a united America were producing results. 1 million soldiers, trained and equipped, were ready to join their allies. In May 1918 began the greatest overseas movement of troops in all history. It was the citizen army of the world's greatest democracy, to fight in a foreign land for American ideals. For those ideals, 1 man in every 20 was destined to give up his life. To the war-weary people of Europe, these fresh and determined men were like saviors. They had come none too soon. In the spring of 1918, Germany had launched her last and greatest offensive. The first contingent of Americans met their baptism of fire in the heaviest fighting of the war. Carrying on at home, men, women, and children were doing their bit, united toward a common goal.
Look, Miss Hatch, 15 radishes. Have I gone over the top?
In one single mammoth effort to help feed the Allied armies, to keep alive Europe's 30 million refugees, the American people resolved that no sacrifice could be too great, or food would win the war. To keep the endless convoys moving with their cargoes of food and materials of war, to replace the thousands of tons of shipping destroyed by German submarines, American shipbuilders were engaged in the greatest construction program of all times. By the summer of 1918, more than a ship a day was going down the ways. Ships of steel, wooden ships, even ships made of concrete. To France in 1918 went many a U.S. political figure, great and small.
What is the type of your artillery support?
Qu'est-ce que nous avions comme artillerie en support?
Nous étions supportés par les batteries de 75 et l'artillerie lourde.
We had in support both heavy artillery and 75s.
Thank you.
On French soil in the ranks of the AEF, 2 million strong, were many young Americans destined to be among their nation's future leaders. And to the front lines went Franklin Delano Roosevelt, then the young Assistant Secretary of the Navy. outrageous to the point of recklessness. American forces by the fall of 1918 had suffered nearly 300,000 casualties, 50,000 killed in action.
Eddie, here's a friend of yours.
It's John Lawton from back home, Eddie.
Mr. Lawton? How did you ever find out where I was, Mr. Lawton?
Oh, that wasn't so hard.
Gee, I never expected to see anybody from back home, way over here.
There were to be more casualties. But in the Argonne on September 29th, Americans had broken the Hindenburg Line, last stronghold of German forces on French soil. Throughout the first week of November, there were repeated rumors of German capitulation. A false report reached America that an armistice had been signed. But the war went on. Then, on November 11th, 1918, come with breathtaking suddenness. No event in all recorded history had swept the minds and hearts of men throughout the world with so deep and wild a fervor of thanksgiving.
Vive l'Amérique! Vive la France! Vive le président Richard!
It had taken 4 long years and the combined efforts of most of the nations of the world to destroy the great German war machine which had threatened their civilization. The American community in the winter of 1918 was preparing to celebrate a new year. Americans faced their future with the confidence of a people who had accepted the gravest responsibility their age could offer. They had fought for and preserved the way of life which was their American heritage.
Well, in a few minutes now, that'll be 1919.
Dan, how about a toast?
You know, I have never forgotten, and I suppose I never will forget, the President's words when he told us why we were going to war. I would say, to the things we fought for and won: democracy, the right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own governments, the rights and liberties of small nations, a peace that will bring safety to all peoples and make the world itself, at last, free.
Guiding the Germany of 1940 and its war machine is a blueprint for world conquest, a book which every good Nazi knows by heart. Its title, Mein Kampf. Its author, Adolf Hitler.
Democracy is a monstrosity, born of filth and fire. While democracy talks, we act. Borders are made by man and can be changed by man. Germany will be the world power or nothing. Almighty God, bless our battles.
First step to conquest in the Nazi scheme is to demoralize the enemy by propaganda, to inspire fear, and to breed terror. At Bermuda, British contraband control officers have intercepted tons of Nazi propaganda, destined to make the Americas fear the might of Germany's great war machine. Most famous piece of confiscated Nazi propaganda is an English language and picture Feuertaufe, baptism of fire, showing the horror and detailing the technique of the blitzkrieg. Hitler used this film to soften up resistance in the European nations he was about to destroy.
The appointed hour is at hand. The attack is geared for lightning swiftness and irresistible power. Total war is a science that Germany has mastered. The operation is directed from the Führer's private railway carriage. For the Führer himself is the final source of all decisions and commands. The orders go out to the various divisions and commanders, assuring perfect coordination of the attack. The first units to contact the enemy are those of the German Air Force. The years of sacrifice to develop this great air force have not been in vain, for thousands of planes will carry the attack to every part of the enemy territory. Stuka planes, perfected by German engineers, dive thousands of feet upon their targets. The Stuka pilot dives upon a railroad junction. To bomb the target, he aims his machine directly down upon it. The task of the Air Force in total war is to attack enemy airfields and disperse enemy concentrations of troops and materiel, to disrupt enemy communications far behind the lines, and to destroy the enemy's vital industrial centers. Against aircraft, such antiquated weapons as armored trains are utterly useless. Because mastery of the air is vital to the lightning attack, airports, both civilian and military, are among our first objectives. Within a few days, the inferior air force of the enemy has been completely destroyed, and the German Air Force rules supreme. To halt the advance of our forces, the enemy has blown up his bridges. But detachments of engineers, assisted by Reich labor service men, restore without delay any roads or bridges rendered impassable by the enemy. And our troops continue their advance unhindered. The lightning attack demands the acceleration of all movements. If bridges are scarce, German forces, even heavy mechanized units, have ways of crossing rivers without them. Meanwhile, parachute troops are dropped behind the lines. These men are able to capture strategic telephone, telegraph, and wireless stations and cause great panic and confusion, particularly among civilians. Ranging far ahead of the main body of the army, panzer divisions, small mechanized, highly mobile units, have penetrated to enemy cities far behind the main battlefront. If the surprised enemy garrison cannot be overcome with hand grenades and light artillery, their hiding place is sprayed with gasoline. The infantry follows the mechanized divisions to destroy the main armies of the enemy. Hardened by long training, the German soldier has incredible physical endurance. Sometimes he must advance 30 or 35 miles a day with no rest and little sleep for more than a week. The capital city of the enemy nation is reached within a few days. When the enemy does not adopt a reasonable course of unconditional surrender, his capital must, unfortunately, be destroyed. Nations which make war upon Germany must be prepared to face the consequences of their acts. The enemy at last has no alternative but surrender. Because of his senseless resistance, the terms will now be less lenient. There is no possibility of compromise with the victorious German army. Vast quantities of war materials of all kinds have been captured, more than enough to replace what has been lost by the German forces. Yet in the city, German soldiers are greeted by loyal friends and admirers. In every country, Germany has such friends. Those who have been of service to Germany behind enemy lines are given an opportunity to identify persons who have persecuted them before the German conquest. Such persons will be shot. As a result of their mad desire to wage war upon Germany, hundreds of thousands of the enemy's most able-bodied men have temporarily lost their freedom. They will be formed into labor battalions and sent to Germany to help with the harvests, and otherwise to take the place of German fighters on other fronts. Under German supervision, many of these men will do useful work for the first time in their lives. The enemy is no more.
Before the power of German arms and the terror of propaganda, and upon quest Hitler has set no limits. The slogan of his war machine, "Today we are masters of Europe. Tomorrow we shall rule the world."
Wenn wir bereit sein werden, unsere überseeischen Pläne zu verwirklichen, können wir mit Bestimmtheit auf die Unterstützung unserer vielen Freunde in Amerika rechnen. Dieses Mal wird kein neuer Wilson in der Lage sein, Amerika gegen uns aufzuhetzen. Amerikaner sind keine Soldaten. Ihre militärische Unfähigkeit ist der beste Beweis für die Minderwertigkeit und Dekadenz der sogenannten Neuen Welt.
Again today, as in the years of 1917 and 18, the American people are preparing to meet the challenge of might makes right.
Overwhelmingly, we as a nation, we are convinced that military and naval victory for the gods of force and hate would endanger the institutions of democracy in the Western world. Once more, the future of the nation, the future of the American people, is at stake. I call for effort, courage, sacrifice, devotion, granting the love of freedom. All of these are possible. And the love of freedom is still fierce, still steady in the nation today.
Our way of life is in competition with Hitler's way of life. And I promise to outdistance him in any contest he may choose. And I promise you that when we beat him, we will beat him on our own terms and in the American way.
Today, under leaders united in their determination to meet force with superior force, Americans themselves once more stand united against the powers of aggression. And as Americans measure their nation's strength, they remember that there have been other times of crisis when the people of America have taken up arms. The founders of America fought for freedom and established their republic by force of arms. Other generations of Americans have fought to preserve it. And Americans today remember that their nation's courage has been tested under fire within the memory of men now living. For in their brave little world, Americans of a generation ago met Christ and emerged from it citizens of the greatest nation on earth.
Now an old man would like to make a toast. To the generations yet to come. In peace may they cherish the ideals which we are handing on down to them. In crisis, may they unite and know, as we have known, the joy and strength of uniting. In war, if it should ever come again, may they hold the ramparts of our democracy and freedom until kingdom come.